We live in a society today where like, oh, you have to be smart, but also you have to be pretty, and also you have to, you know, do sports, and you have to be involved in the arts, and amongst all that, you have to find something unique about yourself, and you have to know yourself, because if you don't know yourself before you do all of that, you're gonna lose yourself.
In the documentary, Race to Nowhere, college admissions state that most students with high GPAs are still forced to take remedial studies in basic high school courses. Fresh out of high school, these students' understanding of subjects is so far behind college entry level that they must relearn what they have been taught, which some say is a direct result of the standardized tests brought about by the No Child Left Behind Act.
The University of California, which is a tough school to get into, and Cal State schools in California. You need B average for the state schools, you need sometimes over a 4.0 for the UCs. They have to remediate 50% of their admits. What that means is almost half of the kids who get into the University of California have to retake basic high school level math or English just to get to where they need to be as university freshmen.
So what is the result? The legacy of NCLB appears to be one of failure, a bill that has seen more school closings, not less, as well as takeovers from the charter and private schools, as well as a whole district swallowed up by state governments.
Chris Whittle said he could make public schools better.
The country needs what Edison stands for.
By running them as a business.
Whittle has always been driven by the grand idea.
But 10 years later, what is there to show?
I told them we're going to lose money here from day one.
Every day you're reading something negative about the companies.
Education is not a business.
A theory floating around the teaching community is that there are many types of intelligences, and that each has their own optimized learning plan. In fact, research in the field is currently being done by the very same teachers struggling to teach in this new modern model.
And linguistic intelligence is how well you're able to use language. The second intelligence is logical mathematical intelligence. So if third intelligence is musical intelligence, the fourth intelligence is spatial intelligence. That's the intelligence which allows us to handle and work in space that's close by. A chess player would have spatial intelligence, a surgeon would have spatial intelligence. Similarly, with the fifth intelligence, bodily kinesthetic intelligence, it comes in two flavors. Sixth intelligence and seventh intelligence have to do with human beings. Interpersonal intelligence is how you understand other people. The seventh kind of intelligence is difficult to assess, but it's very important. It's intrapersonal intelligence. It's understanding yourself. The eighth intelligence, which I added some years ago, is the naturalist intelligence. And that's the capacity to make important, relevant discriminations in the world of nature, between one plant and another, between one animal and another. It's the intelligence of the naturalist, the intelligence of Charles Darwin.
In a paper titled Understanding Differences, published by the Journal of Engineering Education, the writer posits that the high dropout rate experienced in engineering schools is not the result of weak students leaving, but the result of student dissatisfaction with the quality of instruction. Richard M. Felder and Rebecca Brent state that, and I quote, "Faculty complaints about students who remain in engineering through graduation are also commonly heard, with many of the complaints being variations of, they can memorize and plug numbers into formulas, but they don't know how to think." End quote. In the paper, they go on to state that the problem is that no two students are alike. They have different backgrounds, strengths and weaknesses, interests, ambitions, sense of responsibility, levels of motivation, and approaches to studying. Teaching methods also need to vary. The article goes on to state that something that would be taboo outside academics, but taken with relative sincerity when it states that, depending on economic factors and environment, both gender and ethnicity can determine the styles of learning which fits best. How you develop through adulthood is determined in large part by the environment and access to learning at an early age. It is, for example, not hard to believe that a child growing up in poverty would have less access to pre-K education or quality libraries. And factors like single parenthood and availability of nutritious food might impact the child's ability to learn as well. It should be no surprise, for instance, that a child taught at home may have a better chance in public school than a child that has spent most of their time in a daycare center. But none of this matters if you have to keep training new teachers.
It was my brother's second year of teaching. His first year of teaching middle school had gone well enough. He was less triumphant than he thought he'd be. He cried more often than he thought he would. It was a typical first year of teaching. Now it was the first day of school, his second year of teaching. And on this day, my brother's clearest memory is this: the look of shock on his students' face when they realized he'd come back for a second year.
Here's some facts about the teacher attrition rate. A 2012 longitudinal study of teacher attrition rates for teachers having taught within 5 years show that first-year teachers quit to the tune of about 10%. Second-year teachers quit to the tune of about 15%, and third-year teachers quit to the tune of 17%. In an interview with a teacher speaking on the basis of anonymity, I learned that the biggest problem, in her opinion, was that teachers quit after they just started getting good at their job.
This past year was really kind of that final push.
The third grade instructor at Asheville's Isaac Dixon Elementary School loves teaching, but thinks her profession gets no respect when it comes to pay.
Feeling, slightly disrespected in our profession. Maybe even not feeling that people are honoring the fact that teaching is a profession.
So what happens is akin to a brain drain. Schools in struggling districts are forced to replace their teachers every year, and at times are forced to hire teachers with little in the way of experience to fill the gap. The reason cited for the high attrition rate by many teachers is the stress that's involved in teaching long work hours and under an immense amount of pressure from both the school administrators and the parents of students to meet the achievement goals set forth. The success of an entire school can seem to rest upon the shoulders of a single teacher. And if that teacher is further hamstrung with a lack of resources, the task of reforming a school can seem insurmountable.
Where I'm going now is the fact that something that I've complained about for 3 years that this board finally woke up. There is no fight from this administration. I would step down and I would quit if I were you. You don't like it? You're not me. That's the difference. Then you fight for us.
You would think that if you sent your child to a private school that you have the benefit of being free of the bureaucratic nightmares of public schools. But the fact still remains that even private schools must meet federal guidelines and are forced to teach to the test. But even teachers agree there should be standards. Teachers add that the way the tests are administered is often skewed by quantitative measurements, and adds the qualitative measurements should also be taken into consideration when determining the quality of the knowledge of the subject. And in the current model of education, where teachers are simply trying to keep up with the sheer amount they need to teach in order to ensure that students pass the test, the quality of understanding of each subject has decreased dramatically. We need to teach more than just facts. Teaching needs to have more emphasis on teaching a child to think, as opposed to what to think. To question instead of relying on note-taking. The education system needs to better reflect the people they serve. For instance, a suburban school should, by all rights, have a different method of teaching than, say, an inner-city school. There are programs in the works right now, and companies like Houghton Mifflin Harcourt are developing what it calls collections. It's an English course that is supposed to streamline the act of analyzing and reviewing text. It's a form of artificial intelligence that acts as a teacher, marking up an English paper with red ink. It also allows students to highlight text, take notes, and ask questions of their classmates, as well as raise hand function, which allows them to talk to a teacher in real time. It also provides video tutorials for reading difficult texts, and other bells and whistles normally handled by a live teacher. What this does, in theory, is clear the teacher up to do less mundane tasks and helps them be more efficient with their time. Critics state that this is an attempt to fully automate the act of teaching, but in its current model, this is not possible, nor advisable. McGraw-Hill has another software solution for math that builds a database of each student, and using data from tests and assignment scores, determines the proficiency of a student, and based on this information, creates a tailored learning experience for the user. McGraw-Hill states that the program is based on 20 years of research by cognitive scientists and mathematicians, and seems to be a step in the right direction. The problem with the teacher shortage is that teachers aren't capable of year after year tailoring their lessons to fit the needs of a minority group of students. Not to mention that some teachers lack the fundamental ability to do so, or even identify with a student who's struggling. Technology can fill in these gaps, but more money towards not only private sector company research needs to be granted, but also to university and independent studies as well. Profit motive is great, but as I think I've shown, the need to succeed can only take you so far when you lack resources you need to achieve those ends. Politicians often state that simply throwing more money at schools doesn't work, but take the case of Alabama. Since 2011, they have received a 2.9% average increase in their budget in 5 years, and in some studies, ranks dead last in the US when compared to schools in other states. Meanwhile, the average salary is about $56,000, while the state average in Alabama is $48,000. And from a recent study, it seems that poverty still adversely affects third-grade reading levels throughout the state. If money isn't the answer, then what is? Can profit motive tactics improve schools? With the tiny incremental changes to the budget, the data doesn't show it to be true. But lawmakers don't seem ready to admit defeat. So the question remains, should government be in charge of how and what our children learn? Well, like I said earlier, the answer is not as clear as I would like it to be. But not without reason. Without government standards, schools have no reason to succeed, but maybe the answer is not tying success to test scores, and it has certainly been shown that doing so does not prevent a school from failing, and may actually be causing them to fail at a higher rate. Government is focused on numbers, but is not taking a critical eye to the problems that face the school at a ground level. From underpaid teachers, attrition rates, and overcrowding, faculty testing practices, crony capitalism in textbook publishing, a lack of research in the field, and aging technology, to the preclusion of information needed to succeed in college by means of political and religious censorship, each of these problems must be addressed as its own problem, a very real problem that is affecting the achievement of these schools. Until the lawmakers take a long, hard look at each of these problems, the American education system will continue its steady decline. As of 2012, the United States is ranked just below the Slovak Republic in math, and just above Lithuania, a country whose GDP, as of 2016, was reported to be $14,879 US per capita, whereas America is about $54,000 per capita. If this doesn't point to a problem, then I don't know what does.